everyone, I'm continuing on with the necklace. Off camera I did dye this stiff stuff a pale green using Rit dye, and now I'm just sketching on the shape of the necklace. I need to make sure I leave enough of a circle for my neckline, and you could do that by measuring your neck and being really precise that way. I find about 14 centimeters usually covers it. And then I draw another larger circle to give me some real estate to bead on. And I'm just bringing this to a point at the front. So super simple necklace shape, a good one to start with if you haven't done beadwork like this before. I didn't want anything too complex for this. I don't know, I'm feeling really simple with it, back to nature. I had a fiddle about to find the best stones for it. I just wanted to get them to kind of graduate a little bit, so I found some longer ones and then coming to a point. I chose a black stone for the bottom front. I just thought that looked really nice. And then I start gluing things into place. I like using E6000 to glue my stuff down. And then I do like going through all my seed beads just to see which ones I might use for the project. I don't necessarily use every bead that I pull out, but I like to pull out anything that might possibly work. I did pull some whites out. I feel like I probably won't do too much bright white, more tones of white, you know, creams, slightly greys, anything like that. So I've glued my bits and pieces down for this necklace, and I thought I would just reflect on the fact that I feel like it's moved in a slightly different direction than I originally thought when I was thinking about it in my head, which is so interesting. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, because when I was first thinking about this necklace, it really was going to be a grey toned necklace, you know, just very monochromatic, very stone-like and things like that. But as I started getting images and working out exactly what I wanted to do, it was moving in this very forest floor direction or something like that. Still very natural, but lots more colour than I was anticipating, and I'm not sad about that. I'm interested in where this is going to go, but I just thought I would mention that. And so the colours that I've pulled out, you know, originally I thought I would be doing, again, just greys, maybe some slightly grey browns or something, but I've pulled a lot of different colours actually. Whether I use them all, I don't know, but I've pulled different shades of white and cream. I feel like white might not be what I use, that's not bright white, but just creams, and maybe some whites that are more like this, which is like a matte white. So it just doesn't look as stark white, it looks a little softer. I might end up using some of that, but I definitely want the natural tones. But I feel like as well I want to maybe bring in some green or teal. But I do have a couple of elements that already bring a bit of that colour in as well. So I don't know how that's going to all play together, but I've bundled up all my bits and pieces that I feel like I might use. And I'm going to be starting this necklace. So you know that I usually do my beading in front of the TV, or at least I've mentioned a few times I think that I do a lot of my beadwork in front of the TV. It's just really nice because, you know, it takes so many hours to do a necklace, so I feel like there's just something cozy about getting snuggled up on the couch with a bit of beadwork, a blanket, a hot drink, and just going nuts and doing some beading. So that's what I'll be doing over the next while, and I'll be sharing the progress of it. So I might share a bit more of the progress in this video because I've really just glued things and so forth, but I just wanted to sort of talk about it because I was looking at all the colours and just thinking, wow, this is a long way from what I originally thought it would be, which might mean that eventually I'll want to go down a monochromatic design one day just to try that, because, you know, I did sort of think about that originally. I'm also just surprised about wanting to bring in something a little bit iridescent, but I just kind of love that little subtle spark of magic. So I'm really trying to bring in some very, like, the colours that I've picked, there are some that have a shine to them. They seem to be, like, I've picked mostly like matte beads with no finish on them, just solid colours. Or I've picked ones with these subtle kind of shimmers to them that I think could be incorporated to bring that little bit of magic in there as well. I want to keep the iridescent or shiny nature stuff to a minimum because I want that to be more subtle, but I do want it in there so that it's like this little touch of magic. But anyway, that's where we're at, and it's time for beadwork. You can see a little paw there. So Binks kept on, I think he wanted to play with what I was working on, so he just put his paw down onto my mat and leave it there because he knows not to go any further with it, but he would just sort of put the paw out. I will say though, I thought I could leave my bead tray on the desk and everything and just lay something over the top of it, but unfortunately the cats managed to pull the bead mat out from under the boxes that were on top of it, put beads everywhere and made a huge mess. So my bead mat starts looking pretty messy because they just went everywhere. So I now have to, when I'm finished beadwork, I have to put my bead tray in my studio locked away so that they can't touch it. So stitching around the stones is a little tricky if you haven't done sort of increases and decreases of peyote. I go around my stones and cabochons and everything just with a back stitch, and then I work up with peyote. That's how a lot of people do it. And with the stones, because they're not an evenly shaped dome, you do need to occasionally do an increase. I like to do an increase twice if I'm doing an increase, so that I keep an even number of seed beads. So even count peyote is so much easier than odd count peyote because it resolves nicely. Odd count doesn't. So that just means if you do an increase if you start with even and you do an increase, it'll be odd unless you increase it with 2 beads. So I tend to increase in 2 spots. To increase peyote, you just, instead of putting 1 bead on your needle before going through the next one, you put 2. That's all it is. And I do that in 2 different spots to make sure I have still an even count, and then continue to work up. And then if you want to decrease, you just don't put a bead between 2 beads. So a similar thing, if you were to decrease, I would decrease twice, but I often will decrease just by using smaller beads, like a size 15 seed bead instead of size 11, and that is enough usually to decrease as much as I need. But if you need more, then you can actually decrease. And I've used like 2 different colour schemes for going around my stones and cabochons, you can see there. Partly, I will be honest, it was due to not having enough beads, I didn't think, for doing them all the same colour. But I also then really liked it. Like I wanted to introduce some white into this, like not bright white like I was saying, but just some sort of white and grey tones, because when I was looking into it, the Cailleach, it really does associate strongly with winter. And I figured, okay, well, I need to make sure this isn't too forest floor, and I actually do have some wintry elements in there. So I did do that. I did also play around with using this French wire, and it's the first time I've actually used it in beadwork, but I couldn't get it to neatly go around a circle and then finish in a nice neat, connection. I think maybe going around a circle's probably not the way to go, unless you had maybe a bead where the ends are or something. I'm gonna have to play around with the French wire a bit more, but I figured I'll leave it out of that part. and went in with fire polished glass instead. I always use the 4mm fire polished glass. It's a good one for a lot of projects because it's just a good transition from when you're doing your beaded cabochons and so forth. I find that size to work pretty well. And I did change up the colours when I went through and did each cabochon. So, you know, you can see that I started with a brown colour. On the 2 dark stones, I used the same colourings. I used this sort of topaz brown colour lined bead, and then I went into a green. And then at the very tip, like the top of the peyote around the cabochon, I used a sparkly coloured bead, just to add that slight little element of sparkle, but the rest of it was not too shiny, not too metallic and sparkly. Similar thing for around the natural stones. I've gone around it with this, it's actually a grey. It's hard to tell that it's grey, but it looks kind of white, but it's just slightly grey. And then went into a shinier, it was like a translucent coloured bead, and I think it had an AB finish. And then again, at the very tip, I used an even shinier bead. I did a similar kind of colour scheme for these moth wings as well, as I did for the dark stoned beads, you know, the labradorite and the little dark coloured stone. So doing the brown and then going into a green. So it was actually quite a number of hours of work in this part of the necklace, but obviously I'm condensing it down. You don't need to see me do hours and hours of peyote stitch. I am happy with how it's looking so far. I'm not sure how the rest is going to develop, if it will be similar to how I laid it all out, or things might change, because once you put them into context, that's when you might shift things about. But I'm pretty happy with the start of this necklace, so we'll see where this goes. I am going to try and improve the camera angles a little bit for you guys if I can. It is tricky beading on a table and beading for hours and trying to get good footage of it without having to constantly shift the camera and so forth. So I'm trying to get it in a way that's easy for me to just sit down and bead. And I'm noticing that I'm angling the fabric a little bit so you can't see it, but I needed to do that to see it. So I'm going to try and fix those camera angles a little bit for you. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying seeing where this is going so far. I am really enjoying how it's looking, and I'm curious even myself to see where it goes from here. Alright guys, I'll see you next time. Bye!